I twitch a little. Yeah, I got it. Hold on. Good. If I twitch a little or make certain noises, it's my Tourette's. And it's one of the things that I do when I first meet people. When they, I meet them, I say, "Hi, I'm Peter McKenzie, and by the way, I have Tourette's." So they don't think I'm off the walls if I twitch or whatever it is. And I didn't know I had Tourette's, which is discussed in the book, until I met my wife. I first met her in 1992 when she said, she happens to be a doctor. And she said, I think you have Tourette's. I said, what? We saw a specialist. And so I realized I wasn't going crazy. And having Tourette's did affect the trajectory of the first, 45 years or so of my life. Held me back from certain things, but that's okay. Didn't affect my memory. Right. And anyway, what I'm going to do first, I was going to start to talk about various things, but I think I should just read the introduction of the book and the first couple of chapters, and then I can give some explanations about my parents and some other people that appear in the book. I'm going to discuss the famous bootlegged McKenzie tapes and talk about the actual original tapes and why they're so important. And yeah, I'm also going to talk about Hard Rain and Bob's guitars, and also a fellow named Kevin Crown, whom most people don't know about, but he plays a pivotal role in this book and in Bob's early career. If it weren't for Kevin, Bob would never have met us, and his whole life's trajectory would be different. And of course, through Kevin, he met my parents. And the minute he walked in our apartment and met my parents in mid-March 1961, it was all over for him. He started dropping by every day. He knew he'd hit the jackpot with my parents. Immediately fell in love with them. He fell in love with him. And that's what the relationship was based on. It was based on a love of the person. Didn't matter that he was a terrific musician or a guitar player and so forth. If he wound up a janitor, we would have loved him just the same. That's the strength of the relationship based upon the, meeting of the souls. You couldn't make it up. Anyway, I'm going to read from the introduction and the first couple of chapters so you can get an idea of what the book is about. I've never spoken in public before. I'm basically a pretty shy person. So I'm going to read it, and hopefully I'll do a good job. So here we go. This is the introduction. These are very good people. You can talk to these people. They know me well. You can also talk to Peter. He's old now. Peter goes to Harvard. Peter's their son. It's even Mac McKenzie, and they really took me in, and they were beautiful. They took me in, and I lived with them. And they fed me, and it was on 28th Street. And I stayed out all hours and came in and went to sleep on the couch. And Peter was there. I was his idol. At the time, he was about 15. Now he's 18, 19. He's in college. He's a very smart kid. Talk to them. That above quote is from an interview Bob Dylan did in 1965. I wasn't made aware of it until 30 years later. He made clear with those comments, if anyone had any questions or wanted to fill in the blanks, they should ask us. Despite Bob's advice, we were never contacted by the interviewer. One afternoon, 60 years ago, my mother asked Bob what he really wanted. I want to be as big as Harry Belafonte, Eve, he told her. Well, that was his desire then. We all know how that turned out. For the spring, summer, and beginning of fall 1961, our New York City apartment at 10 West 28th Street was Bob's home, and I remember everything. Moving to New York City was a pivotal time for him, and every choice he made then was crucial. The first important crossroad in his career. Even after he moved out, he would come back to visit, sometimes to get advice from my parents on the personal issues affecting his life. My family has always protected Bob's privacy, rarely speaking out, and then only with his knowledge. He had his own way of signaling. He knew the answers would be truthful, but just as importantly, discreet. His trust in my parents was limitless. We were intimate observers of his singular talent as he grew from earnest teenager to serious adult. While his stay at 28th Street has been documented, no one else knows how deep the relationship ran, nor what transpired there, to why it was so influential, emotionally and professionally, to his development. It is the key missing piece of Bob Dylan history. By all accounts, his rise to fame would not have occurred as rapidly or smoothly without the McKenzies. Bob always looked out for me. If I liked the shirt he was wearing, he'd let me wear it. On many afternoons when he finished his daytime business, he'd take out his guitar and the lessons would begin. He showed me his music techniques as well as the special way he played harmonica. Brownie McGee played this way, he would say. Jesse Fuller played this way. Now master them and you'll come up with your own style. No one else got that kind of tutelage from him. If I had a problem with any of my contemporaries, he advised me how to handle it. He loved my artwork and always asked me how I got my ideas. We talked about history and literature. I met his fellow musicians when they dropped by the apartment or when we'd go outside on adventures together. He loved to prank Dave Van Ronk. It was always the real Bob, no pretense of hiding behind a mask, unlike the many other personas he began trying on for public consumption as time and fame progressed. The first time we met him was February 16th, 1961. 3 months later, he decided the pillows on our couch were where he wanted to rest his head. When he asked my mother to be his foster mother, she just smiled. She had a strong feeling his claim to being an orphan was a product of his fertile imagination. Besides, she was already fulfilling that role. And as it turned out, he was calling his mother in Minnesota on the fly several times a month. For those who weren't around or born yet, but have discovered and love his music, New York City was a different kind of place then. It was a hotbed of all things artistic, the place to be. While it can still be an interesting place, the ambience is completely different. It's way more filled with concrete and much more bottom line business oriented. It doesn't have the same spirit open to new ideas when a fellow from the Midwest first hit town. In fact, about 15 years after our first contact, Bob said to us, you know, the way things are, if I'd shown up in the scene and tried to break in now, I might not even get in the door. While sitting one day at 10 West, my back to the sunlit window in the living room, I realized it was almost a lifetime ago since the first morning I woke up in May 1961, my sophomore year in high school, and saw Bob Dylan sound asleep on our living room couch, blankets askew and hair sticking up. I've always carried that initial mental snapshot with me. I couldn't wait for the school day to end to see him back home. I started thinking about then and now, all the who's and what's that used to come, all the who's and what's that used to come in and out of the apartment as if it were a revolving door. My parents, even Matt, were always friendly, hospitable, there to greet everyone and make them feel as if they were at home. I spoke with Bob right after he hit the 5-decade mark. That means when he hit 50. He said, let me turn the page, they're stuck together. 30 didn't bother me. 40 was no big deal. But when 50 happened, it was time to take stock of my life. He did look back after all. The conversation wasn't entirely serious. He decided to give me some advice on how to pick up women. Pete, I'm going to give you some very valuable input. Now listen closely and don't forget, I'm going to show you how to get anyone you want. It's foolproof. When you go to a party, just a little bit off the beaten track, but spiffy, stand against one of the walls as if you're just observing. It will give off this mysterious aura. Before you know it, all the women will be coming over to you because they can't resist mystery. Then you make your move. Well, thank you, Bob, I replied. That's very nice of you to share your knowledge with me. There's only one problem with it. What's that, he asked, deadpan, already anticipating the answer. Well, you're Bob Dylan, and I'm not. His laughter on the other end of the phone was immediate. Some things never change in a relationship. I thought back again to the first morning. Bob was asleep on our couch. I was only 15. He was all of 19. He didn't even look like he had to shave yet. As I speak, both of us are now older than my parents were on that May morning. He had shown up, sat himself down, and from that moment on, the die was cast. His famous poem, My Life in a Stolen Moment, published in the program of his first solo concert appearance at Town Hall in New York City, April 12, 1961, commemorates this. Who could possibly dream what the next several decades would bring? Even though I thought he was the greatest thing, the older brother I always wanted, me being an only child, he was there simply because my parents and I loved him. And he loved us. He was himself with that infectious laugh, a broke and talented kid who'd come in from the cold that my parents gave shelter from the storm. Now I'm going to chapter 1, which is pretty interesting. Chapter 1, February 16th, 1961, the first time. My parents were out for the evening. Although I was half asleep, when the phone rang at 11 p.m., I jumped out of bed and sprinted through the apartment to answer it. It was my mother. You have to come down right now here. It's a place called Gerde's Folk City. It's on the corner of 4th Street, a couple of blocks east of Washington Square Park. You can't miss it. How was Jack's concert, I asked. My parents had attended the Jack Elliott concert at Carnegie Chapter Hall earlier that evening. The concert was fine, she replied, but you have to come down now. Jack is here with us, and one of your father's oldest friends, Cisco Houston, is performing. I knew who Cisco was. Jack and my dad had told me about him. I'd heard some of his records. He was an old Woody Guthrie traveling companion, like Jack, a big union man with a commanding presence. The name Gerde's Folk City was not familiar to me. I heard glasses clanking and people's voices in the background. Jack and your father want to see you, she added. Something special must be going on for her to be that insistent, so I grabbed the first shirt I could find, put on my khaki shoes, school jacket, and out the door I went. Got to the subway stop on the corner of 28th and Broadway. As I went through the turnstile, the downtown train was pulling into the station. 5 minutes later, I exited the 8th Street and Broadway stop. It was a bit chilly, didn't bother me. A few blocks later, there it was, big awning with the words Gerde's Folk City. As I started through the door, I suddenly realized it was a bar. I was 15 and walking into a place where if you're under 18, you get stopped at the door, turned around, and ushered right back out on the street. And yes, the minute the front door closed behind me, the bouncer was right there. You're a bit young to be here, laddie, don't you think? Before I could answer, I noticed a sign that called for a 2-drink minimum. I was screwed. Then a voice from somewhere far inside called, He's with me, let him in. It was Jack Elliott. No problem, Jack, go on in, the bouncer said. I'd never been in a place like this before. It was dark, but nicely laid out. The bar at the back was quite long and lined with stools. There was a roomy aisle to walk back and forth with a 4-foot wooden barrier separating it from the main room. The main room had a whole bunch of tables and chairs. Far against the wall in the center was a small raised stage with a microphone stand. A direct spotlight illuminated it. Off on the corner was an old upright piano. I went over to Jack and shook hands. Your folks told me why you couldn't make it. It's okay. School should always come first. I came right down here after the concert to see Cisco sing. He's a real old friend. See over there? He's with your dad. They haven't seen each other since World War II. My father and Cisco were at the far end of the bar. I walked over. Hi, Dad. Pete, I'd like you to meet an old friend of mine from the National Maritime Union, Cisco Houston. Pleased to meet you, young sir, said Cisco, extending his hand. He was strikingly handsome. Me too, I replied. I've heard a lot about you. He looked at my father. Nice kid you got there, Mac. I knew from my dad's facial expression. I knew my dad's facial expressions pretty well. They could be very subtle. He had the ability when needed to maintain a poker face. When he chose to, it was almost impossible to read. When he was young, he played cards for a living. As he talked to Cisco, I noticed the sadness in my father's eyes. It was only later he told me that Cisco was suffering from terminal cancer and had only a short time left. Cisco was a courageous man. He survived being torpedoed a couple of times in World War II. That courage never left him. You can tell a lot about a man by the way he faces death when it stares him in the eye. I'm sorry we never got a chance to see him again. His music had a big effect on Bob. Peter, your mother is in the main room with some people. Why don't you go over there so she'll know you're here and got here all right, my father said. It was clear he had some personal things to discuss with Cisco, so I said goodbye, waved to Jack, went to find my mother. She was sitting at a table right inside the divider, far from the stage. I went over and sat down. 2 other people were there. My mother introduced us. Peter, I'd like you to meet an old friend of mine, Marjorie Guthrie, and her son Arlo. I looked at Arlo. He was a year younger than I and had curly hair just like mine. Marjorie was Woody's ex-wife. He lived way out of Manhattan in Howard Beach. Both my mom and Marjorie had been dancers with Martha Graham. Both were wives of prominent names in the American labor movement. I wanted to talk to Arlo, but since the talk between Marjorie and my mother was nonstop, I just kept sipping my soda. Then when it looked like there would be a break in the conversation and I could talk to Arlo, an all-encompassing cloud of cigarette smoke wafted across the table. That smell was extremely pungent. Sandwiches had just arrived at the table. For me, trying to eat something with that smell hovering over the food was impossible. I thought it would pass. However, no sooner had the smoke cleared and I was about to grab a sandwich when another large cloud came by, floating by. Now I was pissed. I had gone to meet Cisco Houston and Woody Guthrie's wife. I was hearing stories about Woody and Cisco and learning things about my father from Marjorie and my mother. I was looking forward to making friends with Arlo. In 1956, Pete Seeger had been my elementary school's visiting music class instructor when I was 10 years old in 5th grade. Everyone was given sheets of paper with words and music on it, and we would have wonderful sing-alongs. Knowing the bond between Pete and Woody, I figured Arlo might have some cool stories. Then the cloud of smoke drifted in again. I turned around my seat to see where that heavy hanging smell was coming from. And there was the offender. He must have slipped in and sat down in front while no one else was looking. He hardly looked older than me. He was by himself, slouched down, a cap pulled over his forehead, a big black overcoat, too big, boots, legs crossed, with the crossed leg bobbing, like it wanted to go somewhere but couldn't decide where. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched as he put out one cigarette and lit another, and realized it wasn't going to stop. I wouldn't be able to enjoy my sandwich. I was about to say, would you mind? That smoke is really bothering me. Just stop, or else move, when I heard Marjorie Guthrie's voice. Pete, I see you've noticed our friend. His name is Bob Dylan. He's a young folk singer from New Mexico who just came into New York to visit Woody in the hospital. He even wrote a special song for him. Woody liked it. That was it. There was nothing I could do now except force a smile and say, nice to meet you. He looked at me and nodded his head slightly, but made no sound. My mother looked at him from across the table. I had been introduced, so it was only proper etiquette she be polite as well. Hello, she said. He nodded again, still without a word. My mother turned back to Marjorie and commented, he has such a baby face and he's all alone. She turned again to look back at him in the dim light and saw he was nursing a drink with no food in front of him. Have you eaten? You should always have something in your stomach when you drink. The sandwich is on our table. Come free with the drinks. You have some. He looked back at her and muttered something. Even though I was closest, it was unintelligible. My mother lifted the full plate of sandwiches and handed it to him. Handed it to me and said, Peter, give this to him. He nodded once again. After I passed it over, I couldn't believe it. I never saw an entire plate of sandwiches disappear so fast, including the one I was going to eat. Mom and Marjorie resumed talking about old times. It was getting late. Cisco was looking a bit tired, although still engaged in conversation with my mother. Marjorie and Arlo had a long trip home. Jack had a few drinks under his belt. It's time to go. I was glad Jack's concert went well. We all said our goodbyes. My parents and I made it out through the swinging doors to the street. I could now feel how much colder it had become. Fortunately, as deserted as the streets were in that part of the village at that time of night, we got lucky and caught a taxi. At that moment, God was definitely on our side. I'll make a little comment before I go to the next chapter. Obviously, meeting this vagrant or whatever you want to call him, Bob Dylan, didn't go down with me well. He stole my sandwich, and if I never saw him again, I'd be a happy camper. Okay, chapter 2. The lungs were really blown out. The second angriest I ever saw Bob Dylan was one night in June 1961. He had been hired to play harmonica on a Harry Belafonte album called The Midnight Special. He was really excited about it. I don't know how he got the booking, but he had built up a reputation for his harmonica playing. Not guitar and harmonica, just the harmonica cupped in his hands. Sonny Terry, the legendary harp master on the blues and folk scene, called Bob the gosh darndest white boy harmonica player there was. Bob liked Harry Belafonte's music and was really looking forward to the session. He told my mother his dream was that I can become as big as Harry Belafonte. He was scheduled to play 3 songs. He thought he had died and gone to heaven. Approximately 6:30 p.m. in the night of the recording session, he was almost ready to leave our apartment. My mother saw the harmonicas on the couch. "Wait a minute, I have something for you," she said. She exited the room and came back with a little blue pouch with a string attached. "Here, Bobby, you can put all your harmonicas in there and they'll all be in one place and you won't misplace any." "Oh, thanks, Eve." He put all the harmonicas in the pouch. "Now let me look at you." He turned towards her. She adjusted his shirt collar, made sure his jacket was set squarely on his shoulders. "Perfect," she said, gave him a kiss on the cheek. Off he went. We settled in for a quiet evening, looking forward to hearing about everything in the morning. But soon there were heavy stomping noises echoing up the stairs. The front door opened, and much to our surprise, there stood Bob. His left arm flicked out, and the bag of harmonicas went flying over the lamp atop the little storage chest at the foot of the living room couch. It landed with a clacking jangle next to his sleeping pillow. Clearly, something was not quite right. "It's only 10 o'clock, said my mother. "You had already finished?" You could see his spine bristling, his legs jingling. He was not pleased. "These people must be crazy," he replied. "What do you mean?" asked Dad. I was quiet. "Take after take after take. What do they want? I play the song right every time, but they're not satisfied with the whole arrangement. They make a change and say, 'Do it again.' Never ask me to do anything different. I'm doing it right every time. They should have known what they were doing before they started. Must have done the first song a dozen times. I'm half blowed out. Then this guy in the sound booth says, 'Hey, good job. We're getting there. Let's try it again.' I didn't sign up for that. I took my harmonicas and left. 'Well, what about the other 2 songs?' asked Mom. 'Let him get somebody else.' He was still pacing and angry. 'Sit down and relax,' said my father. 'Pete, get Bobby something to drink. He's thirsty and must be, and his mouth must be dry.'"
Sorry, Peter, can you, you're accidentally got muted. Sorry about that.
Right at the top.
Where did I get muted?
It's at the top. Look.
I got it, but when did I get
I
muted?
do. Ask what's the last thing.
No,
What's the last thing you heard?
I'll let Ed, can you chime in?
Does anybody know where I got muted, where they couldn't hear me?
You're thirsty. He's thirsty. His mouth must be dry.
Okay, there we go. He's thirsty. His mouth must be dry. Okay, good. I got him a glass of water. He sat down on the couch and took a sip. This seemed to break the tension. He was quiet for a moment, shaking his head. Even though it was unheard of for someone to leave a Belafonte recording session, my father reassured him that what Bob did was okay. The good thing is that you were able to hold it in until you got home. You didn't create a scene there. To them, for all appearances, all you did was leave. No harm done. Now that appeared to diffuse Bob's momentary internal rumblings. Even more, because he knew my father didn't make empty statements. But how would my father be so sure of what he was saying? Bob didn't know, but he trusted him. You could see it in his shoulders. The answer was simple. The next day, my father went upstairs to talk with our neighbor, Hank Pearson. Hank happened to be Mr. Belafonte's old Navy buddy. They had started a food concession business together after World War II and remained close friends. My father told him what had happened. He asked Hank to smooth it over with Belafonte the next time he saw him. Yes, of course, Mac, be glad to. I don't know if Hank had a chance to do that, but Dad did make the effort. That was the important thing. He never told Bob about it and told me not to say anything about it either. I didn't until now. I'm just going to read a little bit, and in the book, there is a picture of the actual harmonica that Bob played at the recording, which he gave to me, and a picture of Harold Belafonte's album. Now I'm just going to read a little bit of chapter 3, because it'll give you a little bit more of a background of who and what people were in the building. One of the reasons why it was so magical. So you get a basic overall picture. From 1961, in 1961, chapter 3, this is Jack Elliott. And this is where we met Jack Elliott for the first time. I probably won't go that far, but I'll read you this part. In 1961, from May through September, our Manhattan apartment was the best place for Bob Dylan to be. It became his own private space where no one would bother him, where he could work out all his moves. How a hungry, almost 20-year-old arrived at my parents' doorstep, where throwing a bag of harmonicas in anger would get him reassurance, not admonishment, is a story unto itself. It involves a few special individuals, a special street, and a building. Without that synchronicity, it's anyone's guess what alternate reality would now exist for a very but for a very specific chain of events. To know that story within a story, you need to hear about certain other people. It won't take long, and it won't. My mother and father moved into their apartment after they got married in 1938. They moved there because it was a quiet street, the subway stop on the corner for transportation. Chinese laundry was across the street and also was near a flower shop. There was a bar on the northwest corner of 28th and Broadway. Our building used to have a stoop with stairs, a hat store, and a barber shop adjacent to the stoop. That's all changed with time. The family upstairs in the top floor was Black and originally from South Carolina. They had been in the building almost as long as my parents. They had both apartments and were all wonderful people. In apartment 5R was the aforementioned Hank Pearson and his wife, Frances. Hank's sister, Mommy Darkus, had the other apartment, 5F, across the hall. Her husband, Frank Neal, was a professional dancer and artist. They had two daughters, Little Darkus and her younger sister, Sharon. Both girls were a couple of years older than I. The whole building seemed to be like one big family house. In those days in New York, you didn't need to keep your front door locked. If you wanted to visit a neighbor, you just knocked on the door and walked in. Or people left their doors wide open. It was great in summertime for cross breezes. We couldn't afford air conditioning. Right across the hall from us, in apartment 4F, were Sasha and Frida Maruchis and their son, Dick. Dick was a decade older than I. Sasha was from Russia and was a grand master at chess. He would patiently try to teach me to play the game. As good a student as I was in school, I can't say the same for chess. I knew how to play, but never could concentrate enough to be anything more than a beginner. Bob went across the hall several times while he was with us. later on to play chess with Sasha. But he had a real knack for it. In mid-1960, Howard Harrison, a 24-year-old aspiring photographer and recent Harvard graduate, moved into an apartment that was the floor below us. Howard later took one of the most iconic photos of Bob, the one that appears on the cover of Bob's concert program at Carnegie Chapter Hall on November 4th, 1961. It's included in the official Bob Dylan scrapbook, which I will talk about later, 2005. Bob said, "I love the photo. It looks just like me." Howard was living with Anne Marie, his girlfriend at the time. She was a free spirit and one of the original Flower Children. At first glance, she was often mistaken for Joan Baez. When she went down to the village, other people did double takes. She was very, very popular among the artists and musicians. Joan Baez and my mother talked about Anne Marie on October 31st, 1964, at Philharmonic Hall in New York City, the night of Bob's Halloween concert there. My Aunt Gig and my mother were in the dressing room backstage before the performance. Bob was running back and forth, and my aunt said, "Bobby, you've got something on your trousers." He looked down, saw it, brushed it off. It was a piece of dirt. "Thanks," he said. My mother looked at Joan. "In person, you and Anne Marie don't look at all alike." Joan replied with a roll of her eyes, "Oh, the trouble that girl got me into." Then there's a picture of Anne Marie. And then I'm just going to read this part and then I'm going to stop and talk about other things. Since we didn't have a TV, I would occasionally go downstairs to Howard's to watch a show. On February 8th, 1961, Howard and Anne Marie were out and Walt Disney's Robin Hood was on. I went downstairs to watch it. I was just learning to play the guitar. While I was watching the movie, the front door to the apartment was wide open. There's a light knock, and in walks a slim fellow with a cowboy hat and boots. "Hi, Anne Marie here," were the first words out of his mouth in a quiet drawl. Before I could answer, noticing a guitar in the corner, he asks, "Hey, is that your guitar?" "Yes, why? Do you play it?" "Yes, I do. You want to hear something?" "Sure," he replies. Now, I was now missing the movie. Though I was missing the movie, I was going to show off my newfound skill. Trying to be nonchalant, I picked up the guitar and went through half of my repertoire. A 3-chord song. I was very proud of myself. "Not bad," he said. "You know, I played the guitar a little myself. Mind if I give it a try?" His hands slip up and down the fingerboard, playing so many notes I could virtually barely keep up. He then stopped. "What's your name?" he asked. "Peter McKenzie." "Well, nice to meet you, Peter." "I'm Jack Elliott." Okay, I'm going to stop reading there. Jack came up to the apartment that night, became fast friends with my folks. 2 days after that, and this is where I'm going to talk about some of the other people. Let me get to my notes. A fellow named Kevin Crown, who was 18 at the time, dropped into the apartment. Again, looking for Anne Marie, and the book describes it. And I said, "I have no idea when she's going to be back. Go up and talk to my parents." Went up and talked to my parents and found out who my parents were, particularly my father's background in forming the National Maritime Union and who we knew, et cetera, and so forth. In any case, from that day forward, we couldn't get rid of Jack or Kevin. Not that we wanted to, but they would just come by all the time. They'd talk to my father. He would tell them stories about history and so forth. And the reason it's important, I have to give credit, because this all started with Howard Harrison. If Howard hadn't had that apartment and his girlfriend hadn't been Anne Marie, who looked like Joan Baez, and if Jack hadn't known Anne Marie, and if Kevin hadn't known Anne Marie, and if I hadn't been down at the apartment that night when they came in, we never, ever would have seen Bob Dylan again. But it was because of Kevin's relationship with Bob and befriending my parents. And then it goes into a whole background of Kevin and Bob in the next couple of chapters. Bob was brought to our apartment one afternoon in mid-May by Kevin. And Bob took one look at my dad, one look at my mom, one look at our record collection, and realized what was there. From that day forward, just like Kevin and Bob, Kevin and Jack, Bob was up there all the time. And there were a whole bunch of stories after that, before he started staying with us, about several things that occurred. And then one night, he came back from Wisconsin, middle of May. It was 2 o'clock, well, it was about 10 o'clock at night. And the door opened. So here I am. He sat down. My parents and he were talking. Of course, I immediately opened up his guitar case. That's when he had his 0017 Martins, sort of tickling away on it. Bob was amused by it. Got to be 12 o'clock. It was time for my bedtime. So I went to sleep, but they continued to talk. And apparently it was 2 o'clock in the morning. And it was time for Bob to go. And my mother said, "You got a place to stay?" He said, "No, I don't really." And my mother said, "Well, you're a young guy. New York is dangerous. It's 2 o'clock in the morning. Tonight you sleep here." Anyway, the next morning when I woke up to go to school, there was Bob sleeping on the couch. To make a long story short, without going into a ton of details, he never left. That was it. Next several months, he was my big brother, adopted son. And that's when everything happened. And that is the story that I talk about mostly in the book, going backwards and forwards, to future times when I saw him years later. But I give the whole story of everything that went on that absolutely influenced and changed Bob's life and made him into somebody that he had a foundation on which he could always, leap off of, fall back on, change his life. And that is the key, one of the major keys to why Bob Dylan became who he became. I mean, the influence and input from my dad and my mom, when we discussed movies about Marlon Brando, and talked about the Supper Club, and they even talked about, believe it or not, John Hammond at that point. It's made clear in the book. It helped define who Bob Dylan was to become, unlike anything else. So that's basically it for the moment. We have a little slideshow that Zane has gotten ready. If she wants to start putting it up, it involves some lyrics and other things. So when she has it ready, I would be delighted to share it and discuss it with you. There it is. Okay. Well, okay. That picture, that picture is in the front of the book. Only my mom and my dad That's them in the middle 50s. They're sitting at the kitchen table. I'll talk about that kitchen table in a moment. On the upper left, next to my mother, is Kevin Crown. Nice college kid. In the middle, of course, is Bob.
First manager.
Yeah, he was his first sort of unofficial manager. And then, of course, I can't leave out Dave Van Ronk's wife, Terry Thal. They were both doing this thing, but Terry was more involved in that in a certain way. But Kevin was behind the scenes doing all sorts of stuff and hanging out with Bob a lot. And down at the hotel Bob was staying at, etc. And there, in the bottom, is me.
And your father.
Well, my father is there just above me, but there's me at 15. That's me. Okay, go to the next one and we can talk about it. All right. As you can see, the date at the top says April 21st, 1961. Bob had not started living with us yet, but he dropped by the apartment while he was at his first engagement at Gerde's with his prized copy, legendary copy, as everybody's written about. His copy of Bound for Glory that he carried him with him everywhere, that had little notes in it, his scribbles. The bottom part is the first, at the right is the first 17 verses of Tom Joad. And he walked in the door and wanted to give it to my mother. But it wasn't really for my mother, it was for me. Because he knew my parents hadn't really talked a lot about their history because it was so painful with McCarthy era. They wanted to shield me from it, but Bob wanted me to know about it. He knew he couldn't give it to me directly. He respected boundaries, so he figured, hey, if I give it to Eve, Pete's going to be all over it. Well, that's what he did. My mom put it in the closet. That evening, I was all over it reading it. Loved it. Still to this day, don't know if I liked it because it was the book or because it belonged to Bob, but I learned a lot. And that book is now in the, it was donated, it's now in the Morgan Library. And that's the story about that book. That's where it went from Bob to me to Morgan Library. Okay, this is interesting. On the left is the first draft of the first song, original song, that Bob wrote and completed in New York City. He wrote it in June of 1961. The one on the left is his first draft. And he sang it. He came in one afternoon and sang it to his ex-girlfriend at the time over the phone. There's a whole story about that in the book. And afterwards, he wrote out the lyrics for my mother. And what is it, move over a little? All right, my wife is telling me I got to move over a little so that I'm in the center. I want to be in the center. Okay. That's my wife's, that's my mother's handwriting at the top where it says written by Bob Dylan, summer 1961. That's Bob handwriting below. He wrote out the song for her. That is the first actually completed song. Those are the final lyrics that he wrote in New York City. I'm going to go back to something right now because there may be misconception on people's part. The story goes that Song to Woody was written in Mills Tavern on February 14th, 1961. That's what everybody's always thought. That's not true. Song to Woody was written by Bob Dylan in very early 1961 in Chicago, in Kevin Crown's apartment, before he even came to New York. It was typed with handwritten corrections, and in order to copyright it, it was mailed back, care of Bob Dylan, to Kevin's apartment, never opened. in Chicago. And of course, they left Chicago before it had returned, but Kevin later got it, and on Kevin's death in 1992, that manuscript came to me. It's also now in the Morgan Library. And one of the proofs of its authenticity and how we can say it was not done in Mill's Tavern is because it appears in the documentary with Bob in the background in Martin Scorsese's No Direction Home. It scrolls up the screen as you hear Bob singing. So that's one of the things that is corrected in historically. It's one of the reasons I wrote the book. So there's been so much misconception. There still is today by several writers. I won't mention names, but there are some really great writers. Some have written terrific stuff. But there are one or two that are a bit arrogant and really don't know their butt from their mouth. It's one of those things. I won't name names, but I think people will figure it out. In any case, here's the next one. All right, this is the first draft of which was written at our kitchen table about 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was shown to us the next morning by Bob. This is the first draft of Talk in New York. He eventually sang it for us. We were the first to hear it. That's what that is, written in June 1961. And this one is what appears in the Bob Dylan scrapbook. This is more of the final version of it. They're actually, if you look in the Bob Dylan scrapbook, which a lot of you are probably familiar with, there are at least 6, I think 7 items that come from me that have been put in there. And if you go through the book, I don't know who they credit it to, but a lot of that book, it comes from my collection that thankfully my mother had the good sense to save and put in the drawer. That's a whole other story. Let's go on to the next one, if you would be so kind. Oh, it's very clear what that is. That's the note that Bob left for me one day. When he left the house, he wrote the note. There are a whole bunch of harmonicas because I really wanted to watch till, he was really working hard to learn how to play the harmonica. Bob laughed about it at first because I made a lot of noise, but he wanted to see me do well, so he left me some of his harmonicas, which I kept. And I played when he was out of the house. I play them. And actually, and I point this out later on in the book, I got pretty good at it. And one of my friends in high school was a fellow named Peter Blankfield. Many of you may know him as Peter Wolf, the former lead singer of the Jay Giles Band, big band in the 70s. He was one of my best friends in high school. And I taught him how to play harmonica. And he actually said to me years later that I was one of his first inspirations, me, coming from Peter. But the point is, it was really Bob who was the inspiration for everything. Anyway, that's that story. So here we go. Okay, this is terrific. This is at the time was one of my favorite songs. It's the manuscript that Bob wrote, draft, for Let Me Die in My Footsteps, or I Will Not Go Down Under the Ground in 1962. I loved this song. I believe that Happy Tram was the first to record it. And I do talk about it in the book and how Bob performed it. But it's a phenomenal song. It definitely was his first masterpiece. Before Hard Rain or Masters of War. It's remarkable that someone that young, 20 years old, could write something like that. Next. Oh, by the way, that's in Bill Pagel's personal collection. A shout out to Bill Pagel. Bill, if you're there, you're my man. He's got the house out there, and all you fellows that are there, he's got both of Bob's childhood and teenage year house. He's an incredible collector and historian, and everybody owes a big debt to him. I certainly owe a debt to him. In double checking and triple checking after I read the book, Bill was quite helpful. He's a stand-up guy, and he's gotten some stuff from me. He's got some great stuff, and I tell you, I don't know. Dylan's people and their organization, I don't know where they would be historically without Bill being around. Just amazing. Absolutely amazing. So hi, Bill. Give you a big applause, and everybody there should give you some applause.
Kevin Crown's son, Jonathan, he's one.
Yes, oh, and Jonathan, Kevin Crown's son, I believe, is watching.
He is.
Hi, Jonathan. People do not understand, but when they read the book, they will, how big a role Kevin Crown played in making Bob Dylan be recognized and how much he influenced him. This, by the way, is from my mother's phone pad, which Bill Pagel now has, which is great, which has Bobby and Susie's number, YU93168. She wrote it down after Bob had moved so that we could call him anytime in his forestry department or anywhere else he had to be. And we spoke to him a lot, back and forth. He'd call us, I'd call him, my mother would call him, whatever. So that's a great keepsake. It's my mother's handwriting, saved all these years. Next. Okay, this is the program. It's one of two signed programs known to exist. Bob signed this program, and as you can see there, this is where he refers to, I found myself back in New York City in the middle part of summer, staying at 28th Street with kind, honest, hardworking people who were good to me. And there's an inscription by Bob to me, which says, Peter, I've been caught and brought back all but once. You don't have to. I was fine where I was. I didn't need to leave home. Bob Dylan, April 12th, 1962. I just love the guy. Anyway, next. All right, this is a very interesting thing. Now, I know they have this at the Tulsa exhibition. There are only two other examples, other than the Tulsa exhibit, of Like a Rolling Stone. The first one, which I'm not get into great detail about, was sold for $2 million a few years ago at Sotheby's. That's a nice copy of Like a Rolling Stone. That's all I have to say about it. And there's another copy that no one's ever seen. And I think it's going to be showing up a little later on. But it's a copy that Bob wrote in 1965 that came into my possession via either Bob Johnston or Kevin Crown. Long story that's in the book. What this is a back. No, go back. Go back. Go back. I got to talk about that. Not this. Please go back to the previous slide. Can you do that?
Peter,
Thanks.
I'm on the slide. I think it's just a delay that you have with your internet.
It's okay.
so-
It's great. That's great. That's part of a list of a list set that Bob wrote out. I'm not sure which that's, it was written in late 1964, but on the reverse side, you'll see, once upon a time, you dressed so fine, you threw the bums a dime, didn't you? Anyway, that's the first time that line or the kernel of Like a Rolling Stone appeared in late 1964. That is the first time you'll ever find anything on a piece of paper anywhere. And it's written contemporaneously in late 1964 when it started percolating in his head. That is an amazing document. Okay, next. That is a draft. The first known, and believe me, it is the first known, and probably, without me getting into trouble, the only contemporary draft known that was actually written in 1965, not later. That is the original draft of Like a Rolling Stone with its corrections, etc., and so forth. And that's all I have to say about that. Just enjoy it, look at it. Part of that's in the book, but not the whole manuscript. But if this is videotaped or you take a screenshot, happy to share it with you. The other half of it is on another sheet of paper, but for certain legal reasons, I can only show this one. So there you go. That is the definitive Like a Rolling Stone. Okay, this is also, I'm now talking about his, and Tulsa doesn't have this stuff. Tulsa has most of the stuff from some from 65, but it's mostly from 66 onwards. All of the pre-1965 Bob Dylan manuscripts, about 80% of them have come through me or through Kevin, and are in the Morgan Library. A lot of them, well, some of them did come from Mary Lou Patcherell up in Woodstock. I went up there with my wife one day to talk to her about that, and I actually arranged the purchase of them by a private collector, and then that private collector donated them to the Morgan Library. So now we're talking about bringing it all back home. And so this is just a draft of a manuscript, just like Tom Thumb's Blues. You can go on to the next one. And this, of course, is a really favorite song of mine. I love this song. It takes a lot to laugh. It takes a train to cry. Kind of scrolled out. And I don't know whether it was an actual original draft or it was something he wrote out in the studio for the other musicians to follow and whatnot. Made some changes. But it's a wonderful thing. Next. Again, that's another thing that was written, Ballad of the Thin Man. I know that Tulsa may have a different version of this manuscript, but this again is an original manuscript written in 1965 by Bob. It's actually printed so people could read it. It's not written in his normal scrawl because it needed to be legible to people. So there's that. Go on to the next. Again, this is, I love the little drawing at the bottom of the page. And of course, everybody knows what this is. It's Queen Jane. It appears on the album. And there you go. Happened during the recording session of Highway 61. Okay, here's a good one. All right. Now this is a special story. While Bob was recording, this is Desolation Row. Unbelievable song. I think this is the song that forever cemented Bob in poetic imagery, history, whatever you want to call it. This is such a departure from anything else that he ever did. And he sang it for the first time live at Forest Hills. And the album, I believe, came out a couple of days later, a little while later. Nobody had heard the album yet. But unless I'm mistaken, I'm trying to think about something. No, this was the album like a Rolling Stone was on. That's right. And that didn't come out till a little right after his concert. In any case, while he was recording Bring It All Back Home here in New York, Bob Johnston, his producer, obviously he was his new producer. He wanted to know how best to work with Bob. He actually came up to my parents' apartment, asking advice. How do I get the most out of Bob? How do I avoid any kind of friction? He's heard about Bob and so forth and Bob's idiosyncrasies. So who else to go to but talk to the McKenzies, who knew Bob like the back of their hand, knew him so well. And my parents just said, Bob Johnston, all you got to do is just be straightforward, be yourself, let Bob be himself, give him some room. And as long as you're straight and don't put on any airs, you'll do just fine. And he happened to have this manuscript with him, showed it to my parents, and he left it at the house. And so when Bob sang that in 1965, I was up in Cambridge working during the summer. I came in just for the concert at Forest Hills in August. As soon as I heard the first lines of Postcards from a Hanging, I knew that was the song my parents had talked about as this just a majestic, magical piece. So there you have it. There's the original manuscript from 1965. Okay, this is a nice little story. This is signed from these are an inscribed notebook, an inscribed book. This is Daniel Kramer's book from 1968. A former girlfriend of mine, whom Bob had met in 1963 at the apartment. She had dropped by one day my senior year at the apartment, and she actually had come up and seen Bob with me at a concert he gave at Harvard in April in 1964. But she met Bob at the house. He thought she was very pretty and smart. Anyway, she happened to be in New York with this book under her arm and actually bumped into Bob. And she asked if he could sign it for her. And he remembered who she was. And she said, I'll do you better than that. This is where I'm staying. Come back in the morning and you can pick the book up. Well, she went back the next morning and, well, he decided not just to sign it, but to do a whole bunch of inscriptions on it. So this is one of the inscriptions that were in it. And it's a sort of a parody of, Rainy Day Woman. It's a double page spread. There's only one page here, but it's an alternate humorous version of an additional verse to Rainy Day Woman, 1936, 85, whatever you want to call it. Bob would change the title frequently. And of course, this is an alternate lyrical inscription from like a Rolling Stone where he's saying, don't let other people, don't let anyone get their thrills for you as opposed to get their kicks for you. And he signed it Bob. And there's another page here that he inscribed, which is, I guess if I can see it correctly, ain't it hard to realize that they're not really where it's at, as opposed to what was in there. What's the actual words? Ain't it hard to discover that it's not really where it's at, or he's not really where it's at, or whatever. Signed by Bob. A nice little thing. Is there anything else there? Okay, here it is. What you see on the top is that original typed manuscript with handwritten corrections, copyright 1961, Song to Woody by Bob Dylan, that was written in Chicago by Kevin Crowns, and that's what is displayed in the Martin Scorsese's film No Direction Home. And again, what you see at the bottom, which is marked Don't Think Twice 1962, is a with Bob's doodles at the right. And that's in the Morgan Library right now. It's originally titled It's All Right, is the partial draft of Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, with some handwritten corrections from when he wrote it in 1962, end of 1962, I guess. And that's in the Morgan Library. Thank goodness my mother put everything in the drawer and saved it. And this is from the draft of Masters of War from 1963. And the thing I love about this the most is that that little drawing of by Bob, where he's singing, you know, and I'll stand over your grave till I'm sure that you're dead. And there's somebody playing the guitar, probably Bob, standing over a grave. There's a grave site there. Great little drawing. Bob loved to do stuff like that. It was pretty good. So, okay, and this is from, oh yeah, this is Queen Jane. I'm not sure if I misidentified a previous song, but it doesn't matter. You guys will know what it is. But this is from the Bring It All Back Home album. That's all. It's an original manuscript. I'm actually not sure where this manuscript is. I know Bill Pagel has a couple of them. He has Desolation Row. He deserves it. He's protected it. He got it archivally put together, and he's shown that along with a couple of other things of mine that he has on several of his exhibitions. And it couldn't be in better hands, and will always be preserved for history. It won't be in the hands of some crazy collector who doesn't appreciate what he has. And it just is in it for the money. And this, of course, is the cover of the book. It's from 1960, it's from early 1962. It actually is a photo taken by Marcy Stir.
The cover is not from 62.
No, the cover's not from 62, but the photo is. And that's a picture of Bob and my father. And it was taken at Mark Spolstra's wedding.
He's trying to get a light from Bob.
And he's trying to get a light from Bob. Jack Elliott was there. Bobby and Susie were there. The whole crowd was there. I wasn't there. That's okay. I mean, it wasn't my bag. Although I love Mark Spolstra. He used to come up to the house all the time. I hadn't met Marcy at that point, but he and Bob were pretty tight. My parents love Mark. He was a Quaker then. And, you know, when I found out that he had died a few years ago, I was pretty upset. The same way when I found out Susie had died, I was unbelievably upset. It took months to get over that one. And of course, in 1992, when Kevin died, I was shattered. And when Dave Van Ronk died, that affected me too. So did the death of John Cohn, who I met, and Johnny Harold. And last but not least, because we have to leave a couple of minutes for Q&As, when Pete Seeger died, that was just the end of an era beyond belief. Anyway, that's what I have to say. And my time is up for that. So I guess we have a few minutes for questions and answers. I will say, I think that, I don't know, did Ed hold up the book yet? I don't know. That's what I'm saying.
They showed the cover.
Oh, that was, I think Ed was gonna show up something.
You can hold it.
A copy of the book.
I think Ed held up the book to kind of show that we're getting short on time, but you just keep on.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Yeah,
well,
we got about 6 minutes
that's
back,
the
but you
signal.
show the book.
Okay, here's the book. I will just
It's
say,
on Amazon.
if you want to get the book, you go to Amazon. It's on Amazon.com. You go to it, just type in the book title, my name, and there it will be, and you can make your decision. Also,
On Apple.
if you want to read the ebook, you can go to applebooks.com and you get the ebook from Apple. That's it. I'm done. And there you go. Anybody wants to ask me anything, here I am.
I think the best way to ask questions will be in the chat. Is that we can't see everybody's faces. So if you have a question, and then we'll ask Peter.
Okay.
Do you know how to turn on the chat?
No.
We'll read the questions for you, Peter, no problem.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I can take my glasses off. This is good. I can actually see the wall.
Peter, here's the first question. Who was in the room next to you when you went to Harvard? Because you went to Harvard for 4 years and graduated.
Oh, who's in the room next to me? Well, funny you should ask that. In my senior year, the person in the room next to me were two very well-known people, and we became friends. The first one was Al Gore. I'm sure everybody knows who that is, former Vice President of the United States. And the other was a good friend of mine. We used to have breakfast together. He was a couple years after me. His name was Tommy Lee Jones. I'm sure you've heard about him. And they were cool guys.
The other actor, Sean.
Oh, and the other actor who was a good friend of mine, who was a classmate, and I saw him at our reunion. We had a great time. Was John Lithgow, very good friend. And another one was David Anson, who was his roommate, and that's that. Anyway, there you go.
We have a question from Bangladesh. Pete, when did you
Right.
meet Bob last?
The last time we physically saw him was in the it was the supper club. It was a supper club.
That was a great show.
That was a great show in I believe '94. But we did hear from him once since then. Before he went on one of his tours in the last 2 or 3 years, he called the house. I wasn't in. A message was left, and I guess, he got busy. I'm sure I'll hear from him again. His office knows about the book, and they cleared the book. I made sure to let them know I was writing it, and Jeff Rosen, who handles all of Bob's affairs, gave a thumbs up on it and said, go to it. And I'm sure Bob will read it soon and I'll hear from him. There you go.
Mags and Leo said congratulations.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love you two guys. That I went to school with Mags, classmate of mine from music and art. And Leo, great guitarist, great songwriter, terrific musician, and Mags is a terrific artist. So a shout out to them too. Great people, and we have to get together soon.
Other questions? Several people saying thank you. Excellent talk, Peter, from Nancy. Do you know why Bob
Oh, I
and
thought-
Kevin parted ways?
Hmm?
Why did they part?
Oh.
ways?
Do you know why Bob and
I-
Kevin parted ways?
Yeah, I
Can't
do.
say too much, but for legal reasons.
Yeah, I can't say too much for legal reasons, long story, but Kevin's mission was to get Bob noticed. And then once he got noticed and somebody like Albert Grossman took him on, that really was the end of his, his mission to get him to that stage. After that, they had a friendship. They had a couple of disagreements in late 1964, going on to 1965. I don't know that much about it, but at that point, Kevin was more interested, believe it or not, in the Frank Sinatra Las Vegas type of entertainment. He went to work for the Willard Alexander Agency. He started handling Buddy Rich, and he got into that whole type of show business thing. Eventually, he produced a play on Broadway with James Whitmore called Bully. So his path just diverged, and their lives diverged. And of course, Bob had a family by then, and there was no reason for them to, I guess, affiliate with each other at that point. That their particular purpose of their particular parts of their lives that were meant to be together, they shared them together, it worked, and then they each, as independent people, went about their own way. I hope that's satisfactory.
Much time do we have, Zane?
You can
Here's
take
another
that,
great question.
that
from Mark.
last question, go for it.
Okay, Mark Albert asked, in your opinion, and I think this is a great question, what is the most common misperception about Bob?
Man, you know what? That is a tough one. I'll tell you something. If you no, he's the greatest, one of the greatest guitar players I've ever heard. That's a misconception about
That's what
Bob.
I-
Right. People don't understand what an unbelievable guitar player Bob is.
it's so sad.
He's so subtle. He is the best rhythm lead guitar player of anybody I've ever heard. And I mean that. Nobody can stand on a stage alone with a guitar and himself and put something over like that. The guy could, if he wanted to, he could have been a studio musician. He's that good. Absolutely unbelievable. And I was going to talk about the tapes. I can talk about that another time, but it's in the book about how he plays on the tapes, how he
You
sings on
can
the
very
tapes.
briefly, yeah. Yes, there was a
What?
question about the tapes and then one more question after that. The question was
Okay.
any further regarding the McKenzie tapes.
Well, we're working on it. I will say this about the tapes, and I discuss this in the book. If you took I know there's been this bootleg thing out there called the McKenzie tapes. They suck in relation sound-wise to what the tapes are to the masters. Plus, they have none of the in-between conversations.
Right.
There are 4 tapes, starting with the Thanksgiving tape, which was recorded the day after his first album. The way he plays on the tapes and the way he sings on the tapes, he's never done it like that before because he's at home, he's relaxed. The man has a great singing voice, and the depth which he sings each song on those tapes is better and deeper and different than any way he's ever performed on any album, any other live performance. He's just never reached that level. But the point is, he did it. He's the one that already did it. It's amazing. And if you put all those tapes together, and that's what you're hoping to do, with the in-between conversations, you will get a visceral history. I mean, a visceral feeling and understand and feel the transition from 1961 through 63, when he did Hard Rain for my mother in our apartment. Unbelievable rendition. It's unbelievable. He's never done it like that before or since. You will see the actual, you'll sense how he came from just, song singer to songwriter, performer. You couldn't do that with any of the tapes that Dylan Organization has, any other concert tapes, any albums. This is something so different and so personal. You really see him. That's the real Bob Dylan. I mean, that's him. There's no mask. There's no nothing. You see it. Okay?
Thank
Next.
you. A last question, brief, and thank you so much for everything you've shared. Did Bob ever talk to you about Joan Baez?
Well, not really, because, yes, of course. What am I talking
My
about?
ears.
I'm sorry. I met Joan Baez thanks to Bob. Bob gave a concert at Harvard in 1964, April 11th. I went backstage. It's a very funny story. I'll try to make it fast. Half of my Harvard friends were there, and they all tried to get backstage, and the backstage guard stopped them. There was nobody allowed backstage. Everybody's pushing, cramming in. And of course, they were two black guards. They were very heavy, but they were tough. And I didn't know what else to say. I said, if Bob knows that I was here and I tried to get backstage and he didn't get to see me, he's going to be pissed. They looked at me like, who is this guy? They said, what's your name? They called me on it. They figured he's just some white guy, like thousands of others. We're going to show him up. What's your name, kid? My name's Peter McKenzie. One of the guards went back, and 2 seconds later, he comes running out. Is Peter McKenzie here? Is Peter McKenzie? Bob wants to see him immediately. Of course, I strode up there, and I was big man on campus for the rest of in certain circles. I mean, I was the only one let in. Everybody tried to surge after me. So I'm back there talking to Bob, and Bob says, "Oh, Pete, I have a little surprise for you." Puts his arm around me and takes me over. Now, to me, Bob was always Bob. There was no star power, no nothing. Even when Bob became the most famous thing on the planet, to me, he was Bob. People got excited over him. Great. Well, that's why I view Bob differently than most people. He takes me over to introduce me to someone, and I literally almost fell off my legs. I got tongue-tied. He said, "Pete, it's a friend of mine I'd like you to meet. Joan, this is Pete McKenzie, the son of the McKenzies I told you about." She said hello to me, and I couldn't think of a thing to say. I was completely starstruck. And the only thing I could blurt out was, "I'm your biggest fan." They both laughed, gave each other a knowing smile. And yeah, I met Joan Baez, and that was really great. And also backstage, as I point in the book, at his Halloween concert, my parents and my aunt were backstage while Bob was getting ready to give that great concert at Philharmonic Hall. And also, there was a time when I went to a concert in 1964 in October. I went with Susie Rodolo when he gave a concert at, which I discuss in the book, at Boston Symphony Hall. There was an after party, And the after party was at where Dick and Mimi Farina were staying. So I got to meet Joan's sister, Mimi. She was beautiful, and Dick Farina. And that, by the way, as I said in the first part of chapter 2, the second angriest I ever saw Bob, people always said, what's the first angriest? You read the book and you read about the after party in October of 1964 to the party I went with Susie. That was the angriest I ever saw Bob. That's all I got to say about it.
It's in the book.
What's in the book? Read the book.
You have to
We'll
buy
find
the
out. Anyway, that's it. So there's your answer to the question.
Thank you so much for sharing yourself and your story here with us.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah.
My pleasure. And thank you for taking the time out of all of your own lives, because time is precious, to listen to what I had to say. I really appreciate that. It's a two-way street.
Well, thank you, everybody. And
There's a lot more happening here.
Yep.
Go ahead, Zane.
yeah, I just want to thank,
DuluthDylanFest.com. Oh,
yeah,
so-
thanks, Ed. We've got this delay going on. I just wanted to thank the Bushey family again for allowing us to continue to host the John Bushey Memorial Lecture. I know there's many friends, and John's sister was on for a while tonight. So thank you so much, Peter. And go ahead, Ed, to wrap it up.
Thank you, Zane. DuluthDylanFest.com. You'll find the rest of the schedule for events this week. This is hump day. If you have a working job, 9 to 5, Wednesday is usually hump
You've
day.
left.
So we're halfway through
You've
Dylan
left.
Fest also.
You have
And there's a
left.
lot more happening, and DuluthDylanFest.com is a place
You're
to
not-
see where you want to be. And thank you so much, everybody, for
I'm still
being with
on.
us here in Duluth tonight and Brooklyn, Bronx. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Mark and Susanna from New York.
Thank
Great to
you.
see you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Peter. Thank you,
everybody.
Ed.
Say bye. Wave
Okay.
bye.
Bye.
Bye, Peter.
Bye,
You were
everybody.
wonderful.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Hi and hi and bye, and thank you so
Speak.
much.
Unmute.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Hi, Ellie. Pete.
Oh, Ellie?
Say
Oh, my
margarine.
God. Oh, my God. There she is.
Say it's
Ah.
margarine. Say
Yep,
it's
she's the one. That's the woman that came to Boston to see Bob. That's the one. It's unbelievable. That's Ellie. That's great. That's fantastic.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi, fabulous.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
I
That is great.
outed you.
Yes, you did. Okay. She's in the book. Yep, she was there. When I went back, yep, that's just, what can I say? That's fantastic. Unbelievable.
Anyway,
So good to see
hugs,
you.